Testing, testing.
I hear you loud and clear. I hear you loud and clear.
Thank you.
Good evening, Margaret. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good evening, Margaret. I'm testing my speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you.
My video's not going on, so I'm gonna play with it a little bit. Not sure what's going on.
I'm glad to hear your voice.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm right here too. I'm actually driving my oldest son. I'm going to be waiting for him, so I'm going to be parking right now. So I'll turn on my video in a minute. Okay.
Yes, sir. Well, at this time, pursuant to Section 54956 of the California Government Code, a special meeting of the City Council is hereby called for March 3rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. And Margaret, since we do have a quorum, can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Mendoza,
Here.
Councilmember Meyer,
Here.
Councilmember Rary,
Here.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez,
Here.
Mayor Bryant.
Here. At this time, if you could join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So at this time, we are going to go to item A1. It pertains to the selection of a final electoral district boundary map. And Tim Ogden will provide a brief introduction for the item before turning it over to the city's demographer for the staff report. So I'll turn it to you, Tim.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, and Council, Vice Mayor, welcome. Thank you for adjourning tonight for this special City Council meeting. Tonight, the Council is being asked and invited to select one of the two maps prepared and directed and recommended by the Brentwood Redistricting Commission. And they've sought for feedback from the residents over the last few months and have put these maps together. And so tonight we'll have the city's demographer, Michael Wagaman of Wagaman Strategies, who will walk you through the redistricting process and identify for you the two maps. So we'll turn it over to Michael.
Good evening, Council, and I will jump right in to the presentation in respect of everyone's evenings. And hopefully everyone is now seeing that presentation. As was noted, we'll start with a brief introduction to redistricting concepts, just so you know how to look at these plans and what you're looking at as you're evaluating what's the best plan to use going forward. We'll talk a little bit about the commission process and how they came together to recommend two plans for you, of which you need to select one for final adoption. Under state law, those plans cannot be modified except to comply with state or federal law, and both those plans have been reviewed to verify that they are compliant with those laws. This is the first time I'm seeing all of you, at least since the earlier process. But this is not early in this process. This is a culmination of a lot of work from your commission, who worked really through all of the fourth quarter of last year and a significant chunk of the first quarter of this year to pull together those plans. And again, the goal is to select a plan this evening so that an ordinance can be prepared for first and second reading and adoption by April 12th, noting there's an April 17th deadline under state law to finish this process. So coming to an end here. Again, we'll do that initial kind of redistricting 101. We'll keep it brief since thankfully for you, you don't have to go through the whole process of drawing lines and are instead, again, kind of choosing between A and B, but wanted to make sure you have the tools to evaluate those options and know, how to give some clarity to what you might already be reacting to those plans, because this is the end of the redistricting process. Which just is basically, again, under district elections, members of this body are elected from districts and populations shift over time. And redistricting simply is the act of reflecting those population shifts and redrawing those lines. And it is an important process because it affects how people are represented. And unlike the pre-process, these are lines that are intended to be in place for the next 10 years, So it is important that it be a thoughtful process. These are the criteria that are spelled out under state law. Again, for those who were involved in the prior process, a lot of these will be familiar. They were a part of the law before, but there were some changes. There was some clarity brought into law on exactly what they meant on some of these. And most importantly, they did apply a ranked criteria to them. So these are now ranked. That doesn't mean one thing trumps everything else, but it does give you some ways to start weighing one concept and one criterion versus another. Equal population is exactly what it kind of sounds like, which is that the districts should be relatively the same size. Note that does not mean exactly the same size. There's generally a guidance that districts should be within 10% total deviation. That's the difference between the biggest district and the smallest district. So if one is at +5 and one is at -5, that is a total deviation of 10. And I will note we are talking about population. We're not talking about registered voters. We're not talking about eligible. It is population as reflected in the 2020 census. Federal law on this issue primarily focuses on issues relating to the voting right power of protected classes of racial and ethnic groups. The Federal Voting Rights Act, based on your demographics, probably did not really significantly influence this process. But one thing that was important to note is that race was not a predominant factor in this process, which is important because that's prohibited under the United States Constitution. Contiguity is a pretty easy concept to understand, that every part of the district needs to touch every other part of the district. You can't connect the northeast portion of the city to the southwest portion with nothing in between. Communities of interest is a concept that it's easy for people to understand, but is also probably the hardest process to nail down, in that under state law, it's defined as people with a common social or economic interests that should be together in a single district for fair and effective representation. Now, communities of interest are something that there's no set data set of, and the commission spent a lot of time trying to talk about what are the communities of interest that were important to be preserved and figure out what those may be, and soliciting input around those concepts. And I'll talk about some of the communities they were trying to preserve with the plans that they brought recommended to you. Understandable boundaries is a pretty easy one. Basically means that when the process is over, if you were trying to describe the boundaries of District X, you should be able to say District X follows X street and Y river, and be able to describe to somebody the boundaries of that district and have them know what you're talking about. So that's a pretty straightforward one. And compactness is generally in redistricting the idea that you should be aware of shape and appearance. When districts aren't compact, that's when you start hearing that gerrymander word start popping up. Under state law, there's a little bit of a nuanced definition, which is simply that you shouldn't bypass one area to go grab a more distant area. Now, keeping in mind, compactness is a lower ranked criterion. So if you're bypassing one area to another in order to keep a community whole, that would be that more higher ranked. But that's the general concept there. As we advance. And then there are just a few prohibitions under state law, which are that lines cannot be adopted to favor or discriminate against a political party, and that communities of interest shall not be defined and by their relationship with a political party, incumbent, or candidate. These are, again, prohibitions against that evil gerrymandering word. These are the demographics that the commission started with. I will note that those demographics represent adjusting the geography of your current lines to reflect the Census 2020 geography, which didn't perfectly line up with your existing boundaries, which was a challenge. So there were some places the commission walked in the door and had to make changes just because the census geography didn't line up. And then they also had to reflect that there was uneven growth in the city. As a reminder, the initial districting process, while recent, was used based on the 2010 census. And this is now using 10 years more data, which reflected that faster growth, particularly in the District 2, kind of that northeastern portion of the city. The commission went through an extensive process, and I will say your public was tremendously engaged in this process, which was great. So by the time they got to their third hearing, they had not only the 4 plans I put together, but 20 public plans to go through too. So they had a very extensive menu of options to start looking at. So that was a really positive part of this process. Based on that, they reduced the plans down to basically 3 architectures and 5 different plans. If you look at the naming structure, you'll see that they're kind of related to each other. So blue begat navy and cobalt, purple begat lilac and plum, and so on. And ultimately settled on 2 final plans to recommend before you, the navy and the line plan. I will note on the line plan, there were a couple of minor adjustments that were made based on authority the commission granted. They didn't affect any population, it was just to clean up some lines and in particular, making sure we were using those understandable boundaries, and I'll show those to you. So with that, we're gonna skip over here shortly to go look in the interactive software. But before we do that, just showing those, your current district boundaries, the Navy plan and the line plan side by side, and we'll look at them a little bit more closely here now. And we're just going to switch over here. And in this interactive software, we'll be able to use this during your debate and discussion, so we can turn on and off various layers. So if there's something you want me to show later on, just keep in mind that is an option. One thing I will note is that the commission process largely did treat things as a blank slate. They did certainly talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the current lines, but they didn't really bind themselves to those. And there were a lot of ideas that were explored, many of which ultimately did not find their way into the final recommended plans. So just to note that just because you don't see a particular idea here doesn't mean it wasn't something that wasn't considered by that body. And also to note that as I go through this process, I'll be describing the lines, describing some of the commission's decision making, but I also will describe them relative to the changes in the current boundaries. But I just want to emphasize on that latter point, it's just recognition in part that those current lines are something that are probably more familiar to you, and to aid understanding, it doesn't necessarily reflect the actual debate and discussion of the body. As we go through that process, I'm going to start with the Navy plan. And the Navy plan, the logic there actually started with something else, which are your high school enrollment zones, which are what I'm putting on the screen there. And the idea that was started with was, well, what if we use those as the basis? And actually, if you look at those 2 primary high school zones, they do split the population of the city in just about half. And that's, in fact, what we started to do to look at there using, again, the rail line there, and this is the creek, Marsh Creek, and in essence, taking those 2 halves and then dividing them in half a second time. So I'm going to overlay the Navy plan without any coloring on it, so you can just see the boundaries. And you can see there where, again, we were taking the high school enrollment zones and using those to split the city in half, and then splitting the city in half again. For the Heritage High School Enrollment Zone in the east of the city, one of the priorities was, again, keeping some of those communities of interest whole that were identified early on in the process, particularly some of the subdivisions like Somerset, Deer Ridge, Shadow Lakes. And as a result, what you do see there is some pretty clean boundaries, right? You're using, San Jose, Fairview, and Balfour basically are those 3 dividing lines that are used there. I will note in the Navy plan, one of the results of that is that District 3 is the most overpopulated at a positive 5.2%. That was something the commission debated and discussed, and they basically ultimately decided that it was most important to preserve those neighborhoods, preserve those understandable boundaries, rather than artificially taking a bite out of somewhere, particularly kind of along that San Jose boundary, and taking that out and moving into District 1 just to try to drive those deviations down. So that was one of the trade-offs that they were looking at there. For Liberty in the West, I will note one of the focuses was trying to unite some of the older housing stock, particularly in District 4, which is why you're seeing the boundary there where you're coming down the rail track, then coming up Central to Sycamore, and then down Garin. And this little cut in Garin, I will note, is very similar to something you see in the current lines, because it's one of the ways to kind of balance that population between those two districts. I'm going to turn off the high school enrollment zones for a moment, and then I'm going to turn on the Navy plan just colored in here just so you can see it. And then I'm going to overlay the existing district boundaries for a moment just to kind of describe some of those changes that you are seeing. And what you see there is a couple of shifts, which are one, that you're seeing these areas that were currently in districts 2 or 4 that are to the west of Marsh Creek are being moved out of 2 or 4 and being put into 1 or 3. That's part of that shift in population we talked about earlier, right? Where District 2 was overpopulated, so you had to give up stuff. If district that is over tends to get physically smaller, districts that are under tend to get physically bigger. You then see with District 3 shifting to the north from the current line. I will note that this was an area, this line right here is where the bulk of the split census geography was going on. And so that's the area they really had to make changes to conform with. And so that's where you see, again, the shift to the north occurring. And then you see District 1 coming down and, again, absorbing those areas that had been previously as part of, again, Districts 2 or 4. And then you finally see District 4 absorbing some of those areas around Central and Dainty, some of that older housing stock, and combining it with some of those other areas. So I'm going to, again, just kind of turn that off one more time so you can see Navy by itself. And I'm sure you probably have some commissioners listening in, so if I described any of their thinking wrong or left out an important detail, I'm sure they will correct me. But before we do that, we'll quickly show the line plan. And the line plan I'll just put on by itself for a moment here. And this is the line plan as with the technical cleanup we talked about. I'll come back to that technical cleanup in a moment. But the line plan fundamentally started with the idea of using Sand Creek as a dividing line. That was a major understandable boundary, a potential boundary between communities of interest. And and that there were some common interests that were impacting folks along kind of the northern border of the city, which then resulted in 3 kind of north to south running districts, one roughly along Fairview, and then one divided roughly along the rail line, and then Brentwood Boulevard, both here and here. And that was basically what you ended up seeing there. And with all of these plans, there's no such thing in redistricting as a perfect plan. All of these plans involve trade-offs. And so, for example, one of the things the commission discussed is a trade-off with this plan is that it did end up splitting Somerset. Though conversely, one of the nice things about this plan is you are using very clean and very easy to understand boundaries. There's only a handful of streets used to create all 4 districts here. And part of that and that focus on those understandable boundaries is where we did make those handful of technical changes based on the authority the commission granted. So I'm going to overlap the line plan as it was when the commission originally considered it and with those technical changes so you can see where they are. And they're all kind of in the same area here. And there were 2 census blocks that were shifted here on Fairview and here on Sand Creek. There's nobody in those blocks. Those are the medians in the road. And it was just so that we would be using the same side of the road. So you wouldn't be jumping from the north to the south side of the road. The bigger change is right in this area right here. And to be blunt, that's an area where I'm firmly of the belief that based on some pretty deep research, the Census Bureau got a little confused about the boundaries of Sand Creek. And the census blocks there just got a little a little confused. So you'll see that if I turn on the census blocks for this little area here, as we zoom in, I'm going to turn off the district boundaries for a moment and turn on these census blocks, and everything that you see colored in is a different census block, and don't quite know why they were going up and down like that. But the important thing we do know is that when we overlay the Google satellite imagery here, is that there aren't people in those areas, right? So this wasn't something where we were moving people around, where we didn't know what was going on. These were empty areas. And so that's where this shift was made, to make sure Sand Creek was remaining that understandable boundary and ensure there wasn't any confusion about what that intent was, particularly since you do have some new housing coming in right into this area just to the east of that, and make sure that it was clear, particularly with the commission's intent here, which was to use Sand Creek as a dividing line, that that was what stayed as that dividing line in that area. So I'm going to turn those census blocks off, turn that satellite imagery off, turn back on the line plan as with the adjustments, and zoom back out here for a moment. And really quickly, I will overlay the existing boundaries. Whoops, take one more zoom out here. And when I overlay those existing boundaries, what you will note is, you know, this plan does have more significant changes to the existing boundaries. So there was, it was a little easier to describe those boundaries changes under the Navy plan. The line plan makes more significant changes. As you can see, a lot more stuff going on there. But fundamentally, that's tied to the fact that your current boundaries divide the city roughly into 4 quadrants, while, again, this plan was fundamentally based on the idea of keeping that northern boundary largely tied together, and then drawing those 3 additional districts kind of working from north to south. The other thing I will note here, just on those deviations, because we were just talking about those earlier, just as in the Navy plan, there was a conscious decision to leave District 3 a little larger in order to use understandable boundaries, in order to avoid splitting a community of interest. You're seeing the same here, but in a different district, where District 1 is left a little larger. They looked at earlier plans that left those deviations a little smaller, but didn't do as good a job of using Sand Creek as a dividing line, or didn't do as good a job of keeping that northern boundary largely together. And so it was a conscious decision on their part that those were the more important values that they wanted to represent in the plans they would present to you this evening. So again, you're looking at the line plan standing on its own. With that, I can stop talking, answer questions. I will only note that I can turn off the software in order for make it easier for you to see each other, or bring it back up based on your direction, Mr. Mayor, as we walk through this process and whatever will best facilitate the debate and discussion amongst the body. And with that, I can stop talking.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Mendoza, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just one quick question. Is there forecasting in here for development that we have already planned out in our general plan, but isn't already built yet?
So under federal and state law, when you're talking about are the districts of the same size, you have to look at that 2020 census. So that's the number we're going to use. Now, you are allowed to, not required, but allowed to consider issues of, do you want to take an area that's going to grow, that you anticipate growing a little faster, and leave it a little on the smaller end? That doesn't mean you can go past that 10% total deviation, but it is a factor you can, do not have to consider. And it was part of the commission's debate and discussion right up to the end. So for example, Bridal Gate would be the really good example of that. You see it in 2 different areas. That is an area that has nothing in it now, but they deliberately wanted to put it in, when you're looking at that boundary between 1 and 3, put it in whichever district happened to be the smaller. So that's why in the Navy plan, where 3 is a little larger, you see Bridal Gate going to the north, and why in the line plan, you see it going to the south, where 1 is the larger district.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council of staff? Councilmember Meyer.
I believe it was Lime in the southeast border between 2 and 4 that there's a little tiny drawing out that looked like it might divide a neighborhood.
Let me put up that plan here and we can identify the area you're talking about and we can zoom in. That's the nice thing about software. So this was between districts 2 and 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Navy.
Oh, Navy. All right. And I'm going to do it without the color here. And so this was between districts 2 and 4.
Yeah. So just that one little dip down that looks like Oak Street and Garin. Yeah.
And I'm just overlapping the boundaries there.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to see a breakout of the developments.
So the one development that was split in that area is Town Center, but the housing is above Central. So even though it's represented that way, that this is where the bulk of the housing was.
Okay.
And that's why you do see the current lines, I believe, stop at Oak Street. And that's why they did go a little further south there, was looking at that particular.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any further questions, Mr. Wagaman? Okay, thank you. Michael, it's all yours.
Sorry,
Well,
me?
you know what? What I would like to do then, if there's no more clarifying questions of staff, and before we open public comment on this, at the beginning of public comment, I noticed that Mr. Mike Luker, who was the chair of the commission, is here also, and was wondering if he would like to speak to any of this before we open public comment. That we greatly appreciate the fantastic job that commission has done. And so his input and comments would be greatly appreciated if he would like to. Councilmember Mendoza.
Yeah, I want to hear his comments, but I want it to be as like clean as possible. So I don't want an opinion on either map. I want us to all go in there with a clean slate. So I almost rather not hear, like, I don't want to be influenced by anything. Like, I want us to make it just based on the maps and the numbers. I you know what I mean? Like, does that seem weird to anybody?
We can certainly do that if you'd like.
I don't know. It depends on how anyone else feels.
You will not hear any of my opinions. I will, this is pretty clean. So I don't think you'll be persuaded either way with my comments.
Okay, thank you.
If you're okay with that, Mayor, I'll proceed.
As long as council's okay with it, I'm happy for you to speak.
Excellent. I do want to say too, before this process, and I served as the chairperson for the Redistricting Commission, which was an amazing opportunity to serve. I hadn't heard gerrymandering, the word, for nearly 25 years since my first year law, constitutional law, and I hope to not to hear that word again for another 25 years. So it's been a good process, and I'm grateful for the committee members who served on this, their time, energy, and service to the great city of Brentwood. So I just want to publicly thank Jonathan Wilson, Jennifer Anderson, Sandra Myers, and Shannon Roberts. Thank you also to the Brentwood City staff for their assistance and support in administrative matters. Together, the commission conducted 5 meetings from September to February, the last 4 of which were public hearings. We were involved in community outreach in various ways, and we reviewed, discussed, and refined dozens of maps, much like Mr. Wagaman has discussed here, from the community and with the assistance of Mr. Wagaman. So I want to say thank you to Mr. Wagaman as well for his understanding of the process and the ability to explain these options to the commission. And after lengthy and thoughtful discussion, we did arrive to the 2 proposed maps that are in front of you this evening. And I do want to just close here by saying, you know, on paper, our charge seems simple, but ensuring the criteria that was outlined earlier was followed and taking into consideration a lot of different points of view, it was much harder during all of these meetings. So we do feel that we came up with 2 fair options and appreciate the City Council's role in deciding on one of these. So I thank you again for the time. Good luck in your decision tonight. And again, thank you for your service to the community as council members.
Thank you, Mr. Luker. I know that council understands, but I'm also aware that most of the publics in the community really doesn't understand the the difficulty of the decisions and your thoughtfulness throughout the whole process is obvious and greatly appreciated. So thank you. Margaret, at this time, we will open public comments. I'll turn it to you.
I received no written public comments on this item. If you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature. I'll call your name if provided and unmute you to speak. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per person, and your microphone will be muted after the timer has expired. Let me go ahead and share my timer screen. Sorry, I lost my little list of participants there for a minute. I do have one hand raised. I'll start with Rod. Rod, go ahead.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, I just wanted to say first off, I want to echo what everybody said about the job that the commission did. I attended 4 of the 5 meetings and sat and just watched them. It just made me really proud to be a member of this community, to see that we have so many good people here. They were considered. They had a difficult job. You know, that it sounds easy. Well, you just put together some census blocks, but anybody that's, you know, you've seen that overlay just briefly a minute ago, and they're not blocks. Better name would be blobs, and they had to fight with that, and they had to deal with trying to fit the neighborhoods, and just really considered and very impartial and fair. And I think both the maps that they came up with are technically very good maps. They're both really fine. I do have a preference, though. I do prefer the Navy plan, and my reasoning is really simple. 2 years ago, when we started districting, a lot of people didn't vote in the city council election for the first time ever because they were in districts that weren't on the ballot. And so I think this time around, as many of those people should have the opportunity to vote again as possible. And it's not considered a major consideration, but really, I do consider it a major consideration. I don't see any super advantage to being in any one district or another. Districting was something that was imposed on the city. Nobody really particularly wanted it. We did it because we had to. The city council firmly committed that every city council member would represent every district fairly and vigorously, just because of that. And you know, so without some compelling reason, you know, without some major impetus, something that really makes Plan Lime really benefit people in some way that Plan Navy doesn't, and I cannot think of any, then I just can't see any excuse for disrupting the voting rights of so many people. We should keep it to a minimum. Plan Navy does that. You saw with the overlay of the current plan. Plan Lime makes significant disruptions. And people, you know, to the extent that they're paying attention at all, they should be kind of used to their district, and that should continue. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes it's a good idea to throw out the status quo, but in this case, I just can't see any compelling reason at all to do that. I just think people will want to vote. And again, I've got 15 seconds left. Again, I want to thank the commission, and I want to encourage the city council to always consider opportunities to involve the community, because we've got some really great people here in Brentwood. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Cynthiana Todor. Cynthiana, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I'll be very brief. I echo everything that Rod said, and I want to thank the commission for allocating and really focusing on this not so easy task. They did an amazing job, and I think, but I also want to thank our city council for deciding for such a democratic, impartial, and transparent process to be followed for the redistricting process. So I thank you very much for that. And also another point I would like to make is in line with what Rod just mentioned, that the Plan Navy does offer more equity and respect to voting rights for several of our residents, because it allows them to vote sooner rather than later for their representative, as they were excluded from the previous election round. So that's all I have to ask. Thank you again, and I am confident you will make the right decision for our wonderful city. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Antonio Xavier. Mr. Xavier, go ahead.
Thank you for your time. I just want to say thank you to the districting committee. I know it took a lot of hard work, and we appreciate both plans that were submitted. I do want to echo the comments of the previous speakers. I do prefer personally Plan Navy for the reasons that were already presented. We have residents who have not voted, and it would feel like a disenfranchisement for them to switch districts when we've already started this cycle of districts. I think Navy cleans up some of the problems with the existing map, but it gives the residents who have not had a chance to vote for districts 2 and 4 that chance going forward. Thank you very much.
I have no additional hands raised. Oh, I have another hand raised. I'll call on Carrie. Carrie, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to call in and say that echoing the sentiments of all the previous speakers, my husband and I are in favor of keeping things the same or similar, and we prefer the Navy plan as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have no additional hands raised.
Mayor, we can't hear you. Mayor.
Oh, here we go. For some reason, all of my screens just went blank. At this time, then, we will close public comments. I see that Councilmember Rare has her hand up.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, this is a public hearing, so if we could have a formal motion to close it, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Moved.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
And a second, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Rary?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mayor Bryant?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous.
Okay, thank you. Public hearing is now closed, and I'll turn it to Councilmember Rary for questions, comments.
If Mr. Wagaman can actually put up the map with the three, the original one plus the Navy and the line. Okay. So, and they're right. I mean, there's a lot of sections when you look at the line where people who haven't voted won't be able to vote again. It is a cleaner lines as far as where the streets are. It makes it easier for residents to kind of know what districts they're in. But another problem with the line is that I believe that one has District 1 with 5 plus 5.5%. I don't have those numbers in front of me right now. Deviation, and with the addition of 2,100 units in PA1, that could really, and if it gets built out in the next 10 years, I'd rather see commercial than residential. But if it does build out, we're looking at, nearly 5,000 more residents in that area, which will really shift the deviation in if we were to even consider the lime. So that's why I'm not in favor of lime. I do believe that the Navy is the closest one that we can have towards our current one, which will give people who weren't able to vote last time the ability to vote this time. So my preference would be Navy.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Yeah, I think A is way different, and I don't mind going way different maybe next election, but this time we should give as many people a chance to vote as possible. So I like the one that's most like we have now fixing a couple of things on it. It's the most similar. I also don't like that lime separates Somerset. I listened in on the Antioch meeting, and neighbors talk about how they were split up, before, and it does cause a lot of chaos. So I would, it's one HOA. I just don't feel right about separating Somerset. So I would be leaning towards Navy as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Meyer.
Thank you. Before I say anything, I wanted to share my appreciation for the commissioners. I also watched all the meetings, and it was a lot of work. It was very detailed. It was a lot of repetition. It was complicated. So my hat's off to all of you for all the efforts you put into doing this as fairly and equitably as you possibly could. And I think the two that you came up with are really strong examples of your goals to make that happen. If I was looking at Lyme in the way of one of the comments that we had very early on about council positions and this side of town versus that side of town, I don't really see either one of them acting differently in that way. They both seem to be pretty fairly divided. And I was a little bit concerned about that one part on Navy around the downtown area, but that was cleared up and I'm okay with it. Yeah, exactly. And I do very much agree that people deserve the right to vote. And if they, if a larger portion of them can't based on how we're drawing the lines now, then they've had a lot of years go by without having any say in who they get up on the dais. So I'm also leaning towards Navy. I feel pretty good about it. I think one of the things we have to always think about too is that every one of us is doing work throughout the city and not just in our own district. So I'm not as concerned about the line being not as obvious or confusing to people, because all they have to do is reach out to the city or reach out to council as a whole, and someone will help them with whatever their concerns are. So I'm leaning towards Navy as well.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Rodriguez.
Yes, Mayor. I agree with a lot that's been said already by all the council members. Council member, I think Rary had mentioned the lines are a lot cleaner, and the lime, and then also hear some of the concerns in regards to the lime. My only question is, there was and I didn't see it in the PowerPoint, and I should have probably asked this before the meeting, but there was some numbers that really broke down the different population, ethnicities, and things like that between Navy and Lyme. And it just seemed like to me that Lyme had a lot more diversity. The numbers were closer in regards to some of those things. But I also hear some of the concerns in regards to Lyme. So, I'll be honest, I think both options are great. I also want to thank the committee for being very transparent in regards to being fair and really taking the time to really look at this. So for me, I know there's a lot of concern with Lyme. The only thing, like I said, I liked that the numbers were really close when it came to different groups and population. But if the council is looking at Navy, I would be willing to support that as well.
Thank you. As far as my preference, looking at both of them, really, I just have to echo what the rest of council has already stated. The diversity of Lyme was closer, but there is a real effort in Navy to keep it as close as it was originally, with the advantage of the changes in the census information. And I agree with what has been said. The right for our community members to vote is the preeminent decision maker for me. I prefer Navy. Both of them would work fine, would work well. I think Navy is more fair overall to our residents. And one of the things that we have experienced, I've experienced, that I imagine most other council members have, a lot of people really don't know what district they're in. But like has been said, a phone call to a council member or the city will clear that up very quickly. Councilmember Mendoza.
I just want to make a motion.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. As detailed in the staff report, adopt a resolution selecting boundary map Navy and directing staff to draft the implementing Brentwood Municipal Code amendments.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Rary?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mayor Bryant?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous.
Okay. Fantastic. So as of now, with that motion, until the next change for any other reason other than the timing for the census and the federal recommendations and laws, we have the Navy as our map. I do again want to thank the commission for doing such an absolutely amazing and outstanding piece of work. You're going to be a key influence to how our communities move forward for the next at least 10 years. And so thank you very much for your diligent effort and your excellent professionalism and all the thought that you put in away from the meetings. I'm sure that your lives were impacted for the last several months, and we greatly appreciate it. At this time, if there's no further comments or discussion, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
We have a first and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Yes.
Councilmember Meyer?
Yes.
Councilmember Rary?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mayor Bryant?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimous.
Thank you. Well, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.